This chip on my shoulder started 40 years ago when my mother was 69. She was assaulted in her home, beaten unconscious, raped, and left for dead. I found out the next day and hopped the red eye and arrived at the hospital where she was. The next morning at dawn, she was still on the gurney in the emergency room nearly 3 days after the assault. They hadn't decided whether to admit her. Probably thought she was too old to survive and just waited for her to die. Anyhow, I got her admitted, and 6 long weeks in the trauma ward. She was discharged for a convalescence. In spite of that horrendous event, she gained enough mobility to work part-time in the local library. Why am I telling you all this? Because she was an inspiration. She had earned her bachelor's degree at the age of 60. And inspired by that, I had enrolled in college before she got hurt. And I was able to graduate and then went on to earn a master's degree. And Mama got out of her wheelchair and came to my graduation. Yeah, that was major. I know it's hard going back to school in midlife, but it's really worth it. It really is. I worked hard at it, and I achieved a better job as a result. So as Genevieve said, I'm now enrolled at UNM in a doctoral program. And my dissertation is about how older students are perceived on campus and how older students adapt to the youth-oriented culture on campus. After 5 years of studying organizational culture, I'm going to be able to put that much of it to use. Let me ask you this. Why do the professors, when they lecture about the generations in our society, and they talk about the millennials, Gen Y, Echo Kids, Gen X, boomers, and then they stop? And I say, yoo-hoo, how about those of us who beat the rush? We're called the silent generation. We're the smallest generation in our society. But it's as if we were all dead and gone already. Well, I'm telling you, we're not. We were born during the Great Depression. We remember the Second World War. I grew up listening to my father's stories about his service in the First World War. But we do remember the Second World War. My mother used to say, "Sister, finish your plate. Think of all the starving children in Europe." I hate to say that what's happening in Syria and Africa today is not the first time that refugees were marching miles and starving. We remember that. We went through the polio epidemic and got the first vaccines, the experimental vaccines for it. Some of our classmates lost brothers and uncles in the forgotten war. Talk about being invisible, the war in Korea. We integrated the schools and the buses and the lunch counters and the train stations. There's a wonderful painting in the museum over here about a train station with the sign that said "for colored," and us white kids would go sit in the colored section and raise Cain. We integrated, we really participated in those integration efforts. And I'm going to digress from my script just a moment to share this with you. My mother took me out of school one day in high school to go to federal court and observe when Thurgood Marshall represented the NAACP against the Dallas Independent School District. Yes. Testified brilliantly and lost. And 10 or 15 years later, the superintendent of my school, principal of my school, had made me serve a detention for an unexcused absence, and my social studies teacher had given me extra credit for a paper I wrote in the detention hall. She was all right. And then, and then the principal got promoted to the district's administration and was put in charge of integrating the schools 15 years later. So I just added that because it's such an important memory. Anyhow, where was I? So the problems with refugees and starvation, it was not new, and neither is recycling as we know it today. But back then we called it salvage for the war effort. We don't do that anymore, do we? And there was something else we do. Oh, locally grown food today was called Victory Garden. And there I am, first in the country and then in the city in our Victory Garden. I was kind of cute then, wasn't I? So we integrated all those venues, and we're still contributing members of society. Listen to what we remember. The next time you need advice, seek us. Yeah, we're not done yet. But we are ignored. The wonderful singers referred to that as invisible. Older people on campus are invisible. We seem to be assumed to be demented and frail and useless, and people seem to assume that we're no longer contributing or competent even. And they're astonished when we aren't what they assumed. Their astonishment, based on their false assumptions, is insulting. Why shouldn't Catherine Byers have finished the 2004 Boston Marathon at age 81? Why shouldn't Ruth Bader Ginsburg sit on the U.S. Supreme Court at 82? Why shouldn't I, at age 76, embark on a doctorate degree? And when people ask, what do you want with another degree at your age? I want a job, that's what I want. They'll say, my, you don't look that old. Well, I'm not that old. There's the screensaver on my laptop. I'm sweet 16 with 60 years experience. You can see that real laptop after a while in the audience participation. That's my brain. It goes everywhere, usually in a backpack. It's a great tool. Here's another tool. Well, here's supposed to be another tool. I built my own victory garden in my own backyard last winter. Have you ever tried to dig in our high desert caliche? It's not for wimps. It takes a tool like this. It's awful to be considered inferior at some mysterious threshold that nobody agrees on anyway. The EEO Commission says 40, ARP says 50, the Census Bureau says 65. Kids say it's anybody older than mom. What do you think it is? I think it's when the individual says it is. Maybe when mobility and agility begin to decline, which for some it never does. I mean, if I hadn't tried to kill my mother twice, she'd still be going. What does elderly mean? In some societies, an elder is a person in authority with some some stature in the community, treated with respect, but not here. Mama was not elderly at 69. I'm not elderly at 70, whatever I am, 77. I just had a birthday last week, so I don't know how old I am. I'm sweet 16 with a bunch of years. You and I working together could help those astonished people overcome their biases and assumptions. Let's stop the stereotypes of this spectacular generation. Participate with us in the adventure of long years. So don't you think it's time to get this chip off my shoulder? Some of them, oops, this one says old people can't learn. Well, my professor is out there in the dark somewhere. Ask her if I can't learn with my grade point average at 3.8. This one says, old women aren't interested in sex. Really? Wait till Robert Redford rings my doorbell. Here, you take them. I've got a dissertation to finish.